So hello, welcome to Westeros.org's latest video. This is our discussion of Dorne. We've had several requests about it, and it seems very appropriate to do it since our first Dornish character was our first Dornish character was cast for season 4. This is Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne, played by Chilean American actor Pedro Pascal, and we'll be discussing in this video. We're going to introduce Dorne, its history, its culture, and we're going to discuss Oberyn Martell a bit, and some of the issues around the casting and questions and thoughts people have had. So I'll open it up by starting with the ancient history, the origins of Dornish society and Dorne as a place. Now, in Game of Thrones, the king is always called, his title is King of the Andals and the First Men. In The Song of Ice and Fire, the novels on which the TV show is based, there's an addition to that. It's the King of the Andals and the First Men and the Rhoynar. R-H-O-Y-N-A-R. The Rhoynar are the people from whom many of the Dornish are descended. Why the show dropped it, that's the sort of thing I think I complained about when the first season, saying, leave that mystery there. Let people kind of wonder, who are these Rhoynar people they keep mentioning? The third season did see some references to Dorne. In the very first episode, Sansa is sitting there with Shae, and she's talking about how the ship is going to sail to Dorne, where it's warm and pleasant. In other cases, they didn't really mention Dorne. So, Dorne is the southernmost part of the Seven Kingdoms. Thousands of years ago, it was actually connected to Essos, the eastern continent, by the Arm, which is now called the Broken Arm. And across the Arm, about 10,000 years ago, according to the histories, about 10,000 years ago, it can be varied, the First Men came. They walked across the land bridge between Essos and Westeros. So Dorne was really the very first place where the First Men were inhabitants. So in a certain sense, it is the oldest First Man location. The North would have been much later. And when they got to Dorne, they came into conflict with the Children of the Forest. There was a forest. I don't imagine Dorne proper was a forest. But it had caverns and it had, rivers and little groves and things. And the children were there. The First Men expanded, but they also conflicted with the children. And eventually, the legend goes, the children raised the Hammer of the Waters to try and stop the First Man invasion by destroying the Arm, and they did so. Now it's called the Broken Arm because now what's happens between Dorne and Essos is that there's this chain of islands called the Stepstones, and they were originally part of this land bridge. So that's Dorne in essence. But what follows is, we have thousands of years of history that's quite vague. And we hear about these first kingdoms of the First Men and so on. Dorne was never really properly a unified realm. Dorne, where you had things like the Reach developing and the Westerlands and the Vale of Arryn and the North consolidating and becoming ruled by powerful rulers who controlled these large areas. Dorne remained fractured. It had a lot of petty kings. And it's a harsh environment. It's got these imposing mountains on the north, separating it from the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. It's got a very imposing rocky coastline full of whirlpools and things, making invasion by sea very difficult. So it became quite isolated, and they kind of developed in their own way. And so for thousands of years, Dorne became this sort of, I would guess Dorne was generally a poor, relatively small populated place, but it was too much trouble for anyone to really conquer, not interesting enough for anyone to conquer. So you had all these petty lords and kings, fighting over scraps, fighting in the deserts, fighting in the mountains, trying to control over a bit of land and so on. And I would guess whenever any ambitious king decided, well, I'm going to conquer it, they said no. They would kind of band together to fight them off, and then they'd go back to her fighting. Dorne's interesting. It has a certain nationalism, in a sense, a sort of nascent nationalism that you don't see anywhere else. by the end, I mean, after thousands of years, we get to about 1,000 years ago, and this is the big event. This is the one that's going to really sort of put Dorne on the map. It's the arrival of the Rhoynar. Now, who are the Rhoynar? The Rhoynar they were an ancient civilization in Essos. They were named after the Rhoyne River, this huge river. I guess you could compare it to the Nile, which had this rich civilization developing, rich culture. I would say they were contemporaries of the ancient Valyrians. They were probably, to begin with, more advanced. And they flourished there in this sort of fertile river area, this huge river area. With a culture, a high culture. We're told that when the Andals learned to make iron, it's thought that the Rhoynar may have taught them the secret, may have shown them how to do it. So, the Rhoynar eventually came into conflict with Valyria. We don't really know all the details. We just know, I mean, Valyria was hungry to expand, to add more slaves, to mine more metal, to become more powerful. And we don't really know the details of these Rhoynar-Valyrian conflicts. Well, we do, because the World of Ice and Fire is going to actually provide quite a lot of information about it. But that's for the World of Ice and Fire, so I won't really touch on it. But there's a lot of interesting stuff. But the Rhoynar ended up fighting in these conflicts, and finally there was this huge conflict where Garin the Great, Prince Garin the Great, led an army alleged to be about 250,000 men strong against Valyria. Made Valyria tremble. Well, they were destroyed. Tens of thousands slaughtered, tens of thousands enslaved. The flower of the Rhoynish manhood destroyed. And that left the Princess Nymeria of Ny Sar, one of their cities, who gathered up the people who remained. And you're going to guess, if they took almost all the fighting men out to fight, that doesn't leave a lot of men. So the stories go that the 10,000 ships, as it's said, that's an exaggeration, obviously, were just all women. That's also an exaggeration, but there were probably a very large proportion of women. They fled. They fled Essos in their thousands of ships or hundreds of ships, or whatever that number was, and eventually they found themselves coming to Dorne, where Nymeria found this petty lord, an ambitious one named Mors Martell, and they came to an agreement that they would marry, and they would join their forces. The thousands of Rhoynar that had fled with her would take up arms, and I mean, honestly, you have to assume women were among them. And suddenly, in this fractured petty kingdom where, a man calls himself a king if he has 400 men under his command, here's someone who suddenly has 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000 soldiers at his command. And suddenly he's able to kind of it snowballs. And Nymeria is known as a warrior queen. I'm not quite sure. George has said she wasn't really like an Amazon. She didn't personally fight. But she seems to have been a leader and a general. And she commanded alongside Mors, perhaps. And it snowballed. And they ended up controlling all of Dorne. All the other kings submitted to them, took off their crowns. Although we're told that the Ironwoods, who even to this day kind of mark their royal blood by calling themselves, the head of the house is always called the Blood Royal. The Ironwoods end up having to have one or two of her kings, I guess, sent away in chains to the wall, rather because they wouldn't submit. So, in the end, they conquered it all. And the Rhoynar controlled all the, of Dorne, with Nymeria and Mors at their head. And, after that, the history of Dorne was one where suddenly here's this unified power, who is able to be much more dangerous to other kings. I'm gonna guess, the kings of the Reach, the Gardeners, the Durrandons of the Stormlands, attacked and tried to deal with Dorne, and they couldn't beat them. But Dornish marchers are this area of the borderland between the Dorne's mountains and sort of the Stormlands and the Reach. And that was an area that was hot with sort of raids and counter raids, a lot of feuds, cross-border feuds. Obviously, George is very inspired by stories from the Welsh marches of medieval England, also the borders of Scotland and England, again in the Middle Ages, where there was a lot of, fighting back and forth, the border reivers and so on. Dorne, there would have been wars. We know about some wars like 400 or 500 years ago where House Dondarrion was born when a courier managed to bring an important message despite almost being killed by Dornish reivers who were trying to stop him, and he became ennobled because of it. And all the time, Dorne was independent. No one conquered it. They ruled themselves. All the way through to, the Targaryen conquest. And through Targaryen conquest, George has read some of what happened and it's in the World of Ice and Fire, how the Targaryens, flew into Dorne, and from town to town, castle to castle, they found them empty. There's the servants and small folk around, and they ask, where are your lords? And they say, gone. They've gone away. Because the Dornish, their culture, their desert culture, sort of, they didn't stand and fight. They saw what happened to everyone who stood and fought. The Targaryen dragons, they burned. They faded into the desert. They kind of were ready to do a sort of hit and run warfare. And when they come to Sunspear, the princess of Dorne, who's the ruler, is there. She's old, and she says, she basically tells them, we don't want you here. We don't want dragons here. Don't bother us. And Princess Rhaenys promised that they would be coming back, and they eventually did. And there's a Dornish war and an attempt to conquer Dorne and control Dorne, and it never works. Aegon will claim that he's the king of Dorne, he's the king of the Rhoynar, but it's not a fact. It would be a descendant of his, Daeron the Young Dragon, who about 157 years after the conquest, at a tender age of 14 years old, actually personally leads an attack on Dorne and seizes it, forces the Martells to submit. 4 very bloody years of attempting to hold a place that did not want to be held, despite the prince submitting, which again shows the fact that there is this nationalism, like the small folk refuse to be ruled by anyone but their own princes. They threw off the chains. They killed Lord Tyrell, who was set to be a warden of Dorne, who kind of, sort of I guess you say, the viceroy. And it would be left for another 20, 30 years until a peace was sorted out, a peaceful union in which the king, King Daeron II, that was not even a nephew, a cousin of Daeron I, to marry a Dornish princess, and he married his sister to the Prince of Dorne to finally bring them to his peaceful union. And this would set the tone for the next 100-odd years of sort of relationships between them, until some other things happen, and very important recent history connected to Robert's Rebellion, which Linda will be discussing.
So now for the recent history of Dorne, and while they've made some little references to this on the show, and there's been some in the background material, for the most part they've left that area quite blank, so we thought we could help and fill in a bit. And basically, at the time of Robert's Rebellion, Prince Rhaegar is married to Elia of Dorne, and she's a sister of the current ruling Prince of Dorne, Prince Doran Martell. And their marriage was perhaps something of a surprise to the realm, in that Aerys would have much preferred a Valyrian bride for Rhaegar. As the Targaryens tend to marry within the family, and there were certainly no suitable Targaryens at the time, so they actually went off looking even to the free cities. That is how Robert actually ends up losing his parents, because they were sent off to the free cities to look for a bride, and then their ship foundered on the way back. So eventually he ends up settling for Elia. Now obviously the Martells at this time have some Targaryen blood, so maybe that was a factor in it, since there were those prior marriages that Elia spoke of. But when he settles for Elia, he does anger Tywin Lannister, who had been hoping to marry Cersei to Rhaegar. So that was a sore point, and that was going to prove important. But anyway, Rhaegar marries Elia, strengthens the ties to Dorne, and Elia's uncle, Prince Luwin Martell, at some point becomes a part of King Aerys' Kingsguard. So he is one of the Kingsguard, actually, who is killed during Robert's Rebellion. And Elia and Rhaegar have 2 children, Rhaenys and Aegon. And then, of course, we know that something happens because Rhaegar ends up making off with Lyanna for some reason or other. We don't know what Elia thought of this and what she knew of what was going on, but she and her children end up being left in King's Landing, and Aerys, as it comes to war, as it comes to rebellion, decides to keep them close because he doesn't trust the Dornish. He doesn't trust that Doran will be committing forces on his side. They do eventually. There are Dornishmen that come up, and they're then being led by Prince Luwin as the fighting, for example, at the Trident happens. But he's keeping, instead of sending, Elia and her children to safety somewhere else, then he's keeping them with him in King's Landing because he doesn't trust Doran, who is known as a very cautious person. And this obviously leads to tragedy when King's Landing falls through, Tywin's ruse of showing up at the gates and presenting himself as a friend, and instead sacking the city, since his swornman Gregor Clegane ends up raping and murdering Elia and murdering Prince Aegon, and Princess Rhaenys is killed by one of the other men. Obviously, this makes the Dornishmen very unhappy, and they've also, lost Prince Luwin on the Trident, fighting for Rhaegar. There's talk of a rebellion. In fact, we find that out later in the books that Elia's other brother, Prince Oberyn, who we'll be hearing more about in this video, he actually tries to raise Dorne and rebel and, I guess, declare themselves independent again. And there has to be a lot of high-level diplomacy to calm things down again. But again, this showed the sort of the national spirit of the Dornish, that they'll take this sort of thing very personally, not just the nobles, but the small folk as well. But nothing comes of it, other than we are told, we'll go into that a bit more later, that after this event, Prince Oberyn was rarely seen in the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. He rarely left Dorne and such. So things got decidedly tense between Dorne and the rest of the Seven Kingdoms because of what happened. And obviously they're not particularly happy with, Robert on the throne. So what we see in the books, and what they haven't really touched that much upon the show, is that when, in the second season, Myrcella is sent off to Dorne, it is treated a little bit as a potential exchange of hostages, because they actually set a condition that the Dornish are supposed to send someone back to King's Landing as well, to be on the small council. And they'll see that as basically, we have one of theirs, they have Myrcella, and they should hopefully guarantee that the Dornishmen will continue backing the throne, the Iron Throne, even though obviously it's a Lannister on them, and they have a lot of reasons not to like the Lannisters, given what happened in the sack of King's Landing. So that sets some of the stage for what we imagine that you will be seeing during the fourth season of the show.
So now that we've set the stage for Dorne, past and present, let's discuss sort of what the culture is like, what the people are like, what sets them apart. Besides this, what does it mean to be Rhoynish or to have this Rhoynish influence? Now, we have not met any Dornish characters, except sort of, in the TV show, we have Aremka, who is introduced, and we're told that she claims she's from Dorne, but then we're later informed in the second season that she's not. She's actually from Flea Bottom. Maybe she's part Dornish, but she is a Kingslander. The main thing is, because of all this independence, and because of the fact that Dorne was brought in peacefully rather than by conquest, its customs and its laws seem to be intact. One of the most important ones, one of the ones that sort of sets Dorne apart quite a lot, is that it's a gender-blind primogeniture inheritance laws. That means it is the eldest child, regardless of sex, who will inherit from their father. So there have been princes of Dorne, and there have been princesses of Dorne who've ruled the whole place. And actually, let's even bring up the title, Princess of Dorne. This is the title they had before they were before they were part of a union. It's a Rhoynish custom. Rulers of their cities and so on were called princes, not kings or queens. Now the Rhoynar, obviously they brought their own culture and language and their own religion. But that religion has sort of faded away. I mean, they worship Mother Rhoyne. Rhoyne was a living goddess, was their mother. And in the river, obviously they had all these little smaller deities, hundreds of little deities apparently, the Crab King and Old Man, and the Old Man Rivers, Tortoise. They had all sorts of sort of, animal gods and things, but these have pretty much gone. I did ask George about this a long time ago, and he thought that maybe some of the sort of deities have somehow sort of transferred over as little minor sort of, like how the Celtic gods became sort of, pixies and so on. It sort of adopted in a vague way. There is, of course, a group that has set itself apart among the Rhoynar, and these are the orphans. The orphans of the Greenblood. The orphans were Rhoynar, who came with Nymeria, who came to Dorne, who wanted to return to Essos, but Nymeria burned all their ships and said, no, we are marrying Dorne. Dorne is where we're going to be. They ended up always regretting that, and they have lived on pole boats, going up and down the Greenblood, which is the most significant river in Dorne. And they're kind of like gypsies. They're a little bit apart. They seem to speak the same language. They seem to worship Mother Rhoyne, but whether the religion is a pure original Rhoynish religion or is one that's been debased after centuries of separation, it's not really clear. But they're a small sort of segment of the society. The larger society is a bit divided among the fact that the Rhoynar didn't settle. They didn't distribute evenly through Dorne. So you have when the young dragon Daeron conquered Dorne, he wrote the Conquest of Dorne, a sort of a memoir of it, which is said to be a nice, clear style, which makes me think that it's sort of loosely based in George's mind on Julius Caesar's account of the conquest of Gaul. In any case, he describes the Dornish that there are three types of Dornishmen. There are the stony Dornishmen. These are the Dornishmen of the mountains, of the Red Mountains, and these are those who have the least Rhoynish blood. They are the sons of the Andals and the First Men, who settled in the mountains and those regions and had their mountain kingdoms and mountain lordships. They are fairer. They burn in the sun. Fair complexions, what have you. After them are the sandy Dornish, who have sort of more Rhoynish blood. Now these are an interesting bunch because, they live in a deep desert. Dorne is mostly desert. And they've been described as having been burned brown in the desert sun. Now you think about it, for thousands and thousands of years, and First Men have been living there. I would say predominantly the blood is First Man. And, thousands of years is enough time for selection to lead to a darkening of skin. I don't think, of a separation of peoples. Think of how many, it's not that many thousands of years separating, say, Irish people from, Greeks. But you can tell the difference between a Scottish person and a Greek. It's not been that long, if you think about it in those terms. So, that's those people. And then, the main thing about them is one of the little things they have is noted is, they'll wrap cloths around their helmets and their heads. They'll wear veils. They're desert people. They probably are, I would think, kind of Berbers. I think, George, you're kind of thinking about Berbers wandering the deserts, herding. And then you have the salty Dornish. These are the most Rhoynish blood. This is where the majority of the Rhoynish settled. They settled on the coast. They intermarried. The women who came with the married and the men, whatever, they married with the local lords, and had their children. And so they had the most Rhoynish blood. They're described as live, sort of lean, generally, dark hair, black hair, dark eyes, olive skin. Other aspects of the culture, well, they wear robes instead of, they often wear robes that sets them apart from everyone else. I kind of have to imagine sort of, I don't know, look at a film like Kingdom of Heaven and look at the depiction of the Islamic individuals there. Something along those lines, I think, is what George is thinking. Also, another one I always thought was great is if you look at the old Charlton Heston film El Cid. There's an emir there who I always thought that's sort of a kind of clothing. And George would have imagined, because, George grew up watching these films. I mean, he always thinks of Ivanhoe, the old Ivanhoe film. So I think he probably is thinking sort of depictions from that era, 50s, 60s. Food. Obviously, George is taking some real inspiration from, it's very spicy. They have, chickpeas. They eat stuff that's sort of Moroccan, Lebanese food. Very spicy. So spicy even some of the hottest spices are said to have a drop of snake venom in them. They eat snake. They eat goat. Architecture. The architecture sounds a little bit sort of vaguely Moroccan in style. Sort of Islamic inspired. The culture is distinct. It's distinctly different. Especially in the more Rhoynish area. I'm going to guess if you went to Ironwood, there might not be that vast a difference between how they do things and how people on the other side of the mountain do things. Even if they have these strong differences. The language is gone. The language doesn't exist anymore, as far as I can tell. Maybe the orphans have preserved it. It's never really said, but it has affected how, again, thousands of years of separation from everyone else, plus the Rhoynar influx has led to the Rhoynar speaking differently. It's said that there's a drawl, the Dornish drawl. And at one point, Tyrion thinks that, that the Dornish speech is flavored with the music of the Rhoyne, but you can still understand it, which kind of makes it sound like it's just different enough, but it's not like super easy to understand, but you can understand it, because he was comparing to how the Valyrian languages, the bastard Valyrian languages, each of the three cities have separated, and some of them are quite far from one another. And so knowing how to speak the Braavosi variety of Valyrian doesn't mean you're going to understand more than, say, 30-40% of the Volantene variety of it. So that's the culture. They're definitely different, especially when it comes to women and the role, because of the inheritance law. Women there's stereotypes about Dornish people. There's stereotypes saying that that the spicy foods make the women wanton, and certainly the suggestion is there just seems to be more sexual freedom, including for men as well in terms of sexuality. Dorne seems, and George has said it. In the Seven Kingdoms, in general, homosexuality is frowned upon, but it's not a capital crime. The faith, it's a venal sin. And if you look at the Middle Ages, in fact, at only a certain point in time were people, killed for it. There are monastic laws about relatively minor punishments for sodomy among monks and so on. It was seen as a weakness, but not necessarily some grand, terrible sin where you have to be killed. And in Dorne, that's even weaker. It seems to be more open, and to the point where among the Dornish, it's not uncommon to have a paramour. A paramour being your lover, a publicly known lover, who is not your wife or your husband. Yes, because women can have paramours. But George has indicated, male, female pairings as paramours was not unknown in Dorne. That's just how they do things. They're more open. They're more laid back about it. So long, I think, as inheritance is clear, whose children are whose, it's not really a problem for them. And it certainly marks them out as different in some important ways from the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. They have a different attitude, and because of this, there is tension in some cases. I mean, we know the Dornish Marchers in particular, the Marcher Lords of the Stormlands, have famous feuds, and there are it's the sort of thing where there are Dornish jokes. You tell jokes about Dornishmen, and the Dornishmen probably tell jokes about Marchers, about how stupid they are or what have you. How many Dornishmen does it take to change a light bulb would probably be a joke that would exist if they had light bulbs. So the Dornish culture, definitely different. Definitely, I wouldn't say libertine, although there are aspects of it. There are people who do live actually I'll say that. There are some people who live life at extremes in the society, and we're going to talk about one of them now, Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, who we are really crossing our fingers because he's a really memorable character in the novels, and it'll be interesting to see how he comes out on the TV show.
So, time to talk what certainly I consider the most interesting casting for the 4th season, and in some ways one of the most interesting castings of the whole show, the casting of Prince Oberyn Martell of Dorne. And we have Pedro Pascal.
Yeah. A Chilean actor, or an American. I mean, his parents, apparently the idea is his parents were, from what I've read, were from Chile, in South America, and they fled Chile, and ended up eventually settling in the United States. So he's grown up in the US.
There's very little information about him, I guess you could
little.
say. He has done a bit of TV, he's done some movies as well, I think, but if you try and look him up, basically, you can't find that much. So he's quite an unknown. He's also done some theatre, so...
quite a lot of theatre, actually.
Yeah,
and actually, I'm going to bring up, I mean, we've had people who, actually, I had someone on the forum posted, they had found a blog, or someone had found a blog of a good friend of Pascal's, who spoke a lot about him. And they said, well, they were friends with that person, and, they studied acting, and they knew that he spent 4 years in the NYU's Tisch program for acting, a lot of Shakespeare, Mamet, all that stuff. So he has a lot of theatre experience, and it sounds like he spent a lot of his time, and part of the reason he's not very well known is, up until relatively recently, he spent most of his time in New York doing theatre.
All right.
So, it's important to note. I mean, a lot of the best actors on the show are theatre predominant actors.
I mean, one of our big concerns with this casting, I should say, is that we were really concerned that because it is the big casting for season 4, that they would go for a name actor, sort of just because. I mean, we were fairly unhappy with the casting of Ciarán Hinds for Mance Rayder, even though Ciarán Hinds is a great actor. We felt that it was probably motivated by HBO wanting someone who, to them at least, was a name after Rome, and not necessarily the right person for the role. So, an unknown gives us hope that they've cast on his performance in the audition, and that he is really what they see as right for the role.
Yeah, and I think... I mean, I've been sort of frantically looking for things to try and get more of a sense of the actor. There's a video on Vimeo where he's auditioning for a role in The Illusion, a play, but it's based on a 17th century French play, and it is very theatrical, so you can't really tell how he's going to play a more naturalistic role. I found he played a villain, a heavy character in a Burn Notice short film, or film for the fall of Sam Axe. Doesn't really tell you too much. There's really not a lot there, but again, you have to kind of trust that they found someone who was doing a good job, who was closest to hitting the notes they wanted to hit.
Obviously, then it depends on what did they want. I mean,
it is
as we saw, they went in a very weird direction with the Blackfish by merging him with sort of
the Great John,
John, and you get. I'm a little concerned when we're talking badass characters. What they think is
what they fixate. I mean,
they tend to simplify characters and sort of boil them down to.
Yeah. What we have with him is, he is. I mean, the character of Oberyn. Let's talk about his history briefly. He is the youngest brother. He's younger than Elia. He's younger than Doran, Prince Doran. of course, you speculate that they might drop Prince Doran. He may actually be the Prince of Dorne.
Yes, I'm a little concerned, given that they do need to simplify, that one of the simplifications they may have made is to make Oberyn the Prince of Dorne, because what we have in the books is that when this exchange is made, when the agreement to send Myrcella is made, Prince Doran is supposed to come and take his place on the small council. 50-year-old, goutish, infirm Prince Doran. And then they get a surprise when his younger and not very infirm brother shows up instead.
Yeah.
And they didn't mention this agreement at all. So they may have left that out simply because they were considering, well, maybe we shouldn't have Doran, maybe we shouldn't reference him at all. We'll just make Oberyn the Prince of Dorne. That could also lead to some simplifications in that they could merge Oberyn's daughters with the one. Prince Doran has one daughter, Princess Arianne, and she's currently the heir.
Yeah.
So one of these examples of giant blend primogeniture. They could be merging Arianne and the Sand Snakes, or But yeah, we'll get into those as we.
So I mean, when he arrives, the surprising part is that he's infamous. He's the Red Viper. He is. He's infamous for his duels, his loves, his bastard children, the Sand Snakes as they're called, all daughters.
Yeah. And those lovers, by the way, do include both men and women, because he is. In the rest of the, in Dorne, he's not necessarily infamous for it, but in the Seven Kingdoms, he's certainly infamous for being bisexual and being quite the, libertine and quite the sort of very open about his adventures.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we do have a quote from EW in James Hibbert's article where they describe him and they mention it. Like, he loves the boys, he loves the girls, he loves them all equally, whatever. So
and they love him back.
They love him back. So we're keeping that aspect of the character. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, when he arrives with his paramour, Ellaria, Sand. Sand is the bastard name for among Dornish, by the way.
So he doesn't have a wife.
He doesn't have a wife. Never
he has 8 children, but not a wife, and
most by different lovers.
Yes, the 4 youngest are by Ellaria.
4 or 3?
4.
I'll trust you on 4. All right.
It is 4. Well, it was 2 because this is one of those where George slipped a bit. It was 2 originally, and then it turned into 4.
All right.
And it's so clear in the later books that it's 4.
Yeah. So he's someone who I don't know what incidents they're going to mention. And in the books, we'll talk about book incidents and give you some background on the character. At the tender age of 15 or 16.
He wasn't a man yet.
He wasn't an adult yet.
Yeah.
He seduced old Lord Ironwood's paramour.
Yep.
Which led old Lord Ironwood, who was a famous warrior in his day, a big man apparently, to insist on a duel.
Yep.
Because of the tender age of a prince, it was only to first blood. They were both wounded, and honor was satisfied, but shortly after Lord Ironwood died of a festering wound, and it was claimed that it was poisoned, and
hence the Red Viper.
The Red Viper.
Yes.
And he studied at the Citadel. It said that he went to the east, and he
studied for a few years, forged a few links, and got bored apparently.
Yeah.
So he's supposed to be this very intelligent, charismatic. I mean, that's part of my concern with it. They're just going to turn this into badass warrior because. Yeah. He's got a lot of other things going for him.
Yeah. So he forged some links, got bored, eventually goes east, ends up
writes with the Second Sons for a while.
Writes with the Second Sons,
forms his
own sellsword company. Allegedly learns poison, alchemy and magic, poisoning people as well. Comes back. Accidentally, in a jousting accident, cripples Lord Tyrell's son, but of course they've dropped that son entirely as far as I can tell, so that's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lord Tyrell's son and heir, the oldest son, who obviously has disappeared from the TV show.
Yeah, I don't know, because that actually sets up, there's a distinct Tyrell Martell enmity about the Red Viper.
Obviously, there's always been that, because the Reach and the Dornish have a long history of killing each other, but particularly Mace Tyrell, the current Lord of Highgarden, absolutely hates the Martells and absolutely hates Oberyn.
Yeah. So does Lady Olenna.
Oh yes, she has a few choice things to say.
So there's that tension there to deal with, and But of course,
I'm not sure how they're going to explain that. Did he like accidentally stub Marjorie's toe or something now in a dance?
Yeah, of course. The big thing is the Martells. They have their their old enmities with the the Baratheons or the Stormlords and the Reach Lords and the Tyrells.
And the new enmity.
The new enmity, and that's the big one for them, because of Elia's death.
Yeah,
Elia was raped allegedly by Greg Clegane and murdered.
And they either assume that Tywin ordered it because of the slight as Tywin felt it when Rhaegar married Elia instead of Cersei, or at the very least they hold him responsible because Gregor Clegane was his man and he organized the whole sack of King's Landing. So
yeah, we remarked on this in our review of the 10th episode, Misa. Yeah, Misa.
I think so.
Yeah, where Tywin and Tyrion are discussing after the Red Wedding, the news has arrived, and they turn it into a bit of family and duty, and I wanted to carry you into the sea, but I let you live because you're a Lannister.
Yeah.
In the book, what happens is that it segues into the whole thing of what was promised to Doran Martell, and one of the things that Tyrion promised, or what they wanted, was the
head of
the heads of those responsible for Elia's death.
Yes.
One of them was Amory Lorch, who they've already killed off.
Yeah.
He was supposed to have personally stabbed little Princess Rhaenys, who was 4 or 5 years old. He stabbed her multiple times and claimed because she wouldn't stop screaming or something, or she hit him, scratched him or something. But Gregor, and Tywin at first sounds like, well, messy business, but what can you do? But in the books, he kind of backs out.
Yeah.
On it. But, the TV show hasn't even touched on it.
There's an interesting discussion there that I kind of wish we'd gotten, because that sort of furthers his relationship with Tyrion as well, because he feels actually necessary to tell him. Well,
because some people say, oh, well, Dorne, no one's going to remember or talk about Dorne and Elia. Well, no, but it also characterizes him. It gives you something about him, like the fact that, no, he wouldn't, out of spite, order the death of Elia.
No.
It's just like with Catelyn. Catelyn wasn't supposed to be killed in the books.
No.
It wasn't part of the plan. He doesn't know quite what happened there. It's not like he's going to shed any tears, but he didn't insist that, Catelyn had to die or anything. Robb had to die. That was clear.
Yeah.
But Catelyn didn't, in his view. So it was a bit of a surprise there. But as he says to Tyrion, I didn't know what I had in Gregor Clegane. I just saw someone huge and fierce. Yeah. He was like 17 or 18 at the time. He was already enormous and dangerous. He just didn't know. Yeah. So he didn't think to say. I mean, I told them to kill the children. Yeah. They had to go. Yeah. Robert saw himself as the hero. He wouldn't have it in him to kill them. He didn't want blood on his hands. I had to do it. But Elia, she didn't matter.
One can wonder if it was necessary to kill Rhaenys. I mean, Aegon was absolutely necessary from his point of view, obviously. But...
Well, I think any heir, I mean, if she escapes, then they'll try to set up a marriage, and suddenly, so I think that, I think in that sort of cold-blooded, ruthless, Machiavellian way.
True, but you could also have thought of perhaps keeping Rhaenys and then marrying her to a son of Robert. But it would have been
it's not like Robert would have wanted it, given how he felt, but he was probably right, but he couldn't bring himself to actually do the deed or order the deed. So better that someone took care of it beforehand. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, what we have here with the Red Viper is someone who is...
I mean, they say that in the article, he's, driven by vengeance.
Driven by vengeance. He wants revenge for what happened. Yes. So, now, a big thing that has come out, and let's talk about this sort of, is when he was cast, and there's been a lot of speculation of how the Dornish were going to be cast. I mean, you had a Remka, who claimed to be Dornish, but wasn't, and she's being played by Sahara Knight, I think an actress of Indian or Pakistani origin. But they've gone for a Latino actor, Chilean actor, and this has caused another tempest in a teapot situation, because, I mean, how to put this? I mean, what I have always envisioned, I'll say that. Yeah. What I've always wanted is someone who looks approximately like what is described. Yeah. Someone with olive skin and dark hair and dark eyes. The lean look and so on. I think physically he looks pretty good.
Not half as good looking as
Not as
him,
half as
but,
good-looking as-
you know,
fine,
I
fine.
have a big
Yeah.
bias here.
yeah, she loves Oberyn. She wants to have his babies.
Who doesn't? I mean, who doesn't?
So, but, to me it wasn't, and I said, I could see a huge range of actors.
Yeah.
Mediterranean was
Yeah.
what I really took out of it. Mediterranean actors, so, Southern Spanish, Italian, Greek, Lebanese, Turkish, Egyptian, Moroccan. I mean, there's a huge range.
Yeah.
Indian, I could have even seen this. I just wanted them to look like
Yeah.
they look different. Now, he looks, in some photos, like, fairly pale. In others, he's quite dark. If he's anything like me, then I'm Cuban.
You put him out in the sun and he toasts like a cookie.
Yeah, I mean, he's someone who's been living in
Yeah.
New York most of the time. I'm not surprised that he's
during
pale.
the winter, there's not that much difference between our sort of skin tone, I would say.
Yeah.
And then a few days of sun here, even in Sweden, and I get red, and he doesn't. He gets brown, and he gets brown quickly, and then all of a sudden, there's a big difference between us.
Yeah, so to me,
yeah.
I don't mind. I think
No.
from what I can see, he probably does seem to have an olive complexion, a sort of Mediterranean,
Yeah.
just on the lighter side. But he's gonna tan very, very well, and that's it. And I don't mind.
No,
And I mean, he
no.
looks distinctive. I mean, Chileans. I mean, let's be serious here. I was looking around. I mean, the average Chilean is about 2/3 Caucasian, European Caucasian, descended from Spaniards, and about 1/3 Amerindian. They have a lot of South American Indian population. I don't
There's
know.
always a problem, as we've been discussing it a little back and forth between ourselves, that when you try to apply sort of real world, genetics or
Yeah.
ethnicities
Yeah.
on a fantasy setting, because while we have the idea that the Rohirrim, obviously the salty Dornish probably look the most like the Rohirrim originally did.
Yeah.
So we can probably guess that the Rohirrim were olive skinned, they were dark haired, they were dark eyed.
Yeah.
But there's nothing to say that they were actually they wouldn't fall under Caucasian. So
I
to
mean,
speak.
yeah, I
we,
mean,
we have no description of their features. Oberyn has a sharp nose and aquiline features. There are plenty of you talk about Roman noses.
Yes. Yeah.
And I tend to see Greek, perhaps the sort of the Greek look, and I often think about sort of Greece for Dorne in that sense, because I also feel that there's a little bit of Greece in the conflict between Valyria and the Rohirrim.
Certainly, the idea of the Rohirrim as a sort of
Cultured higher civilization a
civilization.
little earlier, and then you've got this empire who comes and obviously much more violent and much bloodier, much more brutal
Yeah.
than what actually happens between Greece and Rome. But I mean, George doesn't draw from a single place, so there's a little bit of that.
yeah. What George has said. I mean, when he was asked about the Dornish, he kind of it's like a mix of Morocco and Palestine and Wales.
I mean, you see it in the names. You have an Oberyn, you have a Tristan, Quentin. So I mean,
Yeah.
But some of the names are sounding like they could be. I think I was actually looking and saying that the area of France, that Brittany,
Yeah.
actually some of them fit into sort of mythological names of that area and such.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I think to me the Wales thing is primarily. I mean, he kind of borrows some of the names, but I think he was thinking alongside of the marches
Yes,
and the conflicts there.
But that just shows some of the mixing.
The mixing he doesn't.
That
It's
he
not
does.
any single thing. He has commented one sort of, I guess you would call it a fan casting,
Yeah.
where I think I'm the one who's kind of started it, where I suggested that I thought Salma Hayek would play Princess Ariane,
Yeah.
who is introduced later in the series and so on. And George said, he admires her a lot, but when he was thinking more along the lines of the actress and singer Apollonia Cotero, circa Purple Rain. She ran with Prince for a while. If you can look around for her.
Obviously, you'll find in general that if George has a fan casting for someone, you can often find them in the 70s and 80s, basically, because that would be what's given the strongest impression on him.
Yeah. And she was a Mexican actress. I've looked. Some claim she's Mexican. Some claim she's half Italian. I don't know. She looks Mediterranean to me. She looks Latina to me. So to me, there's nothing wrong with a Latino actor
No.
in the role. I mean, there are extremely fair pale Latinos, and that probably wouldn't be right because he's got olive skin.
No.
But so for me, anyways, I didn't think of it in terms of a specific race.
No.
I just wanted someone who had olive skin and dark hair.
Yeah.
We'll see how he comes out.
I mean, I do
For sure.
hope that they actually give him dark hair because I've seen him in some things where it's sort of
It's kind of dark brown.
yeah, but it should be black.
Okay. I don't go that far. That doesn't really bother me.
And long, please.
Long hair. They don't. Yeah, that would probably be good. It's actually. I'll reveal how geeky I was when we went to the Anaheim convention. I dressed as the Red Viper for the human chess tournament. And a fellow Latino.
I'll have to admit that I spent a few frantic days beforehand trying to sew a robe.
It worked very nicely, I thought.
Yeah, I'm not a seamstress in any way.
It worked very nicely.
Yeah.
So, and a fellow Latino and a fellow fan of the Red Viper complained to George that it's something along the line, but how he should be the Red Viper.
Yeah.
So he's closer. And George commented, yes, but he's got all that damned hair.
So
So I think long hair seems to be right.
it says that in the description of the song.
They've got
With
long
long
hair.
black hair streaming in the wind.
Yeah.
So they wear it long and loose.
It'd be nice. It'd be nice. It would make them
Set them apart,
more apart.
because
So
they've already kind of got given roby things to the Lannister women, at least.
yeah,
so,
they've given lots of weird, interesting costuming choices. So.
yeah. You are a little shorter and stouter.
I am
suppose we said.
shorter and
Oberon
stouter
is
and
a bit-
Oberon. No. I'm
How
not
tall or not? There's
I'm
been
not
some.
nor so handsome, nor so clever, nor so brave, nor yes, thank you.
Well, I'm just since we're
Yes, no.
discussing his.
Fine.
Saying that
I'm
he-
just
he's
it's
quite
the
the
hair
lean,
is all I'm talking about.
tall, or well,
Tall in the saddle.
Yes.
Doesn't mean anything.
no, we don't quite know that because actually one of the sort of myths about Dornishmen, like the Arya reveal says
Yeah, the small.
small and dark. Aren't you all small and dark? Because she meets at one point
Edric Dane.
Edric Dane, who is a stony Dornishman. Well, as far as the Danes are a little bit, but anyway,
They are stony.
Yes.
They would have intermarried.
true. He's not dark. He's
Ash blonde hair.
ash blonde hair and
Blue eyes.
and fair complexion,
Yeah.
and doesn't look at all Dornish to her, obviously.
Yeah.
So everyone else in the Seven Kingdoms who hasn't seen the Dornish see them as small and dark, kind of, like the Picts tend to be described in England, basically.
Would have been nice if they also had man singing the Dornishman's wife as another way to hint a little bit of the culture.
True.
So, in any case, I'm fine with the casting. I mean, in the end, it's how he acts and how
Yeah.
he's interpreted and how he's written. I hope it comes out well.
We should say that if they are casting his paramour, Ilaria Sand, it would certainly be very appropriate to cast someone darker for that, because Ilaria is at least half Sandy Dornish.
Yeah, her father's
Father
Lord House
is-
Uller.
Yes,
Yeah,
so and the Sandy Dornishes are
Darker.
burned brown by the sun is how they're described, and even though that is probably not primarily due to their Roynish heritage, that is probably actually due to them being first men who've
Who've been
hung
there.
out in a desert for a few thousand years.
Yeah.
So they're the same stock as the Starks, but they've darkened over time.
Yeah, it's amazing to look if you look at the sort of the history of the sort of genetics of skin color. I mean,
Yes, I think you looked up
The
something
variation-
suggesting that lighter skin might have developed as late as 10,000 years
years
ago.
yeah. So it's just something.
So the first men being in Dorne for 10,000 years would certainly have been plenty to darken them, even unless the first men already weren't quite dark, as we.
Probably weren't. I mean, I was planning to look it up, but I'm pretty sure it was a suggestion that the first men are a little darker than the Andals in
Yeah.
general. Not just hair, but tone. I mean,
Yeah.
if they cross via the arm, which is basically southern Essos, the first men probably came from southern Essos.
Yeah.
So they were probably sort of, to begin with,
Yeah.
slightly darker skinned.
Yeah.
Now I would
I mean,
imagine
the
thousands of
Andals
years
and the Valyrians are the ones that are known for being very fair.
Yeah. So I would imagine that I mean, the same selection process would have led to the first men in the north growing lighter, but the first men in the deserts grew darker over time. So it'll be interesting to see. I think there's room for. I mean, I would love it if Dornishmen, if they showed us all the kinds of Dornishmen.
Yeah.
I don't think they ever will.
No.
It won't happen. I would love if we saw Dorne. I would love all sorts of things to do
Yeah.
with Dorne because it is.
It's our favorite area.
It is it's an area. I mean, if you've got a place to be a fan of,
Yes.
that's our area,
Yeah.
and also it's just, I mean, partly, again, I'm Cuban, but I've read Andalusian history and
Yeah.
El Cid and all this stuff. So that's sort of the sort of the Taifa states and all this stuff. It really fascinates me, and sort of the fact that the Moorish Andalusia was advanced in some ways,
Yes.
and so and it was also quite open. I mean, I recall reading a book of Andalusian poetry, and the things that they wrote about were kind of eye popping. Including poetry allegedly by a woman talking about how she wanted her lover to bend her bend her legs back so her ankles touch her ears and so on. Like, wow, those words, those Andalusian were limber. So I kind of imagine that sort of thing going on, and I think
it's certainly, given that they kind of like getting people naked on the show. I'm sure they're going to embrace that aspect of porn.
Yeah, not say they're nudists, but there's nudity in any with Dornish. Yeah. So I mean, it's very exciting to see what they cast him, and that they cast someone not based on name, but seemingly based on who acted the best for the job.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, everyone wants to say that the casting is golden, and Nina Gold never makes a mistake. I wouldn't go that far.
No.
I can't say, sadly. Nonzo Anonzi left much of an impression as Zorro. It has nothing to do. I mean, part of it is the writing, but it seemed like he didn't know what to do with the character.
I think they didn't know.
They didn't know what to do either, and then so
they changed the character, and so often when they change a character radically, they can't really fit them back into things.
Yeah, I mean,
they did a good job when they switched out, and introduced Locke instead of Argo Holt. That worked quite well, even if he ended up looking like Count Rugen. But hey, we recently rewatched The Princess Bride, and boy, it wasn't obvious.
Yeah. Which,
of course, brings us to an interesting point that someone joked, and it's been joked over the years several times, that Prince Oberyn is a little bit of the Inigo Montoya of Westeros.
Yeah. But that would be going into spoilers to discuss.
Yes,
so
but we're not going to just leave it at that.
Driven by vengeance, though.
Yes,
they've said it, so driven by vengeance. That's an important part. Yeah, I mean, the casting, and on the other hand, I thought, like, Lucian Basmati as Sal Rosan, they changed his age and things, but he captured the vibrancy of the character.
True.
So, it really comes down to how they interpret the character and, how the actor interprets it and how it comes out. So I hope they nail it, because, I mean, the Red Viper is one of the most memorable characters introduced in the series.
We basically, before Storm of Swords, he was in the appendices to Clash of Kings, not to Game of Thrones, I believe, or maybe he was. No?
Not sure about that.
But I think he was in one of the appendices at least. And we had these little hints, and that was basically enough that people were excited when the book came out to meet this character, because he's just one of those really larger than life, that George has a way of, with just a few words, painting a character that just leaps off the page, and he certainly does. Yeah.
So we'll leave it at that, I think. And
we hope he leaps off the screen in the same way.
Yeah. That would be a good way to end this one. So we'll see next year. We'll see about Pascal as the Red Viper. I'm kind of hoping, it'll probably be after the New Year when we start seeing stills and so on to see what the actor looks like.
Fingers crossed. It's one of the things that I really, really hope will be working for the 4th season, because that would be something.